So he said, we're going to have a meeting of all the scouts, and it's going to be in London. And when he called them together in 1909, even though he had only taught 20 boys the techniques of scouting and wilderness survival, in 1909, 11,000 boys showed up to learn more about scouting. And it was at that point also that girls showed up. And so he said right away, we had better have a girls' movement as well, and it will be called Girl Guides. So I'm sure you know some of that stuff already about General Baden-Powell and the origins of scouting, but I want to focus on that one part where the boys were really afraid when he came to see them, and how they realized they shouldn't have been afraid because he was just bringing them new information about how to live and how to enjoy life and how to survive in the wilderness. And I want to tell you a little story about when I was afraid that somebody was coming to see me because they were coming to inspect my work. A long time ago, well 20 years ago, I bought a little cottage in the forest beside a lake in Nova Scotia. And at the time, I had 3 children, and it was only a little 2-bedroom cottage. So all 3 of my kids had to share 1 bedroom, and the only way to fit them all in was to build a triple-decker bunk bed. And I would stack them up at night like this in the triple-decker bunk bed. And that was fine when they were little babies, but when they got bigger, they said, look, we can't fit into here anymore. You've got to make the cottage bigger. So I planned to put an addition on the cottage with 2 new bedrooms and a new bathroom so they would have lots of space. And I drew up the plans, and I took them over to show my neighbor. And my neighbor's name was Fraser. And I said, Fraser, what do you think of these plans for the addition to my cottage? And he said, they're great. He said, you should just go ahead and build that. And I said, well, before I build it, I have to go into town and speak to the building inspector and get a building permit. And when I said that, Fraser's face turned white. He was horrified. And he said, you're going to do what? And I said, I'm going to go and get the building inspector. And he said, you can't bring the building inspector over to this side of the lake? And I said, why not, Fraser? And he said, well, we've been building cottages over here since before the Second World War, and the building inspector has never been here. He doesn't even know we have these cottages. And if you bring him over, and if he sees all the stuff that we've been building, he's going to be mad at us. And this guy, he said, this building inspector is really mean. If you don't build things right, he makes you tear them down again. And I said, well, I think I have to get the building inspector. Well, Fraser went and told all the neighbors that I was going to get the building inspector. And the neighbors formed a posse. And they came over and they said, Mark, don't call the building inspector. He's horrible, and we don't want him over here. Now, I have to explain something to you about why Fraser didn't want the building inspector. He had built his cottage back just after the Second World War, and he'd been adding pieces onto it, and it was terrible. I had put a shower into my cottage, and so Fraser decided he had to have a shower in his cottage. So he went somewhere and he bought this second-hand shower. It was a solid fiberglass shower, 42 inches square, and he thought he was so smart. But when he brought this one-piece fiberglass shower to his cottage, there was one problem. His doors were only 32 inches wide. And he could not get the shower into his cottage. And I said, well, Fraser, you thought you were pretty smart, didn't you? But now you can't get that shower in. And he said to me, oh, he said, that's no problem. I can fix that. Well, the next morning, I woke up. It was about maybe 7:30, and I could hear somebody running a chainsaw. And it was coming from Fraser's cottage. And I went down the hill and I walked all around Fraser's cottage. I could still hear the chainsaw, but I couldn't see anybody. And I realized it's because Fraser was running the chainsaw inside his cottage. And I went and I walked in, and there was Fraser with the chainsaw in the hallway leading to his living room, cutting a 42-inch wide hole in the wall, with the plan of simply sticking the shower on the outside and building a platform underneath it. And I said, Fraser, what are you doing? And he said, this is the only sensible thing to do. And I said, Fraser, I thought you told me there was a law down here that you couldn't run your chainsaw before 8 o'clock in the morning. And he said, oh, that only counts for outside. The cabin was full of smoke. His wife, who was quite deaf, came out at that point, and she said, Fraser, there's a lot of smoke in here. Is something wrong? And he said, no, dear, I just burned my toast. Well, you can understand why Fraser did not want the building inspector coming down to our side of the lake. So I finally said, okay, I will build this without getting a permit. And I started to build. I started to dig the holes for the foundation of my addition. Although I'll tell you, it's awfully hard to work with a guilty conscience. I started digging with a great big auger, and of course every time I heard a car coming down the road, I would throw the auger into the bushes and stand outside, assuming that the building inspector was coming or he was going to report me. And after a while, my guilty conscience got the better of me. And I have to tell you this, you can't do anything if you have a guilty conscience. If you're worried that you've done something wrong, all of your physical and emotional energy goes into hiding the thing you did, so you have no energy to enjoy God's gift of life. And I said, I can't go on doing this without a building permit. So without telling any of the neighbors, I snuck away to town with my plans, and I got a building permit, and the building inspector said, I'll be out in 2 days to inspect your site and to see if it's okay for you to build. And I was afraid, because I had heard all the terrible stories about this building inspector and what a mean man he was and how he made people tear down their cottages. I was afraid to tell anybody that he was coming. But he came out 2 days later, and he was looking at my plans, and he was walking around the site, and he was shaking his head like this.